Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and I've got something exciting to show you today. It's a preview of the upcoming Super Conqueror, a Tier 10 British heavy tank, a replacement for the FV215b that will be hitting the game in update 9.20.1. Now this vehicle has spaced armor welded all over the top of the turret and also on the front of the hull, which gives this vehicle remarkable protection as long as you're able to hide its lower plate. But to be able to gain this, it has to sacrifice quite a few aspects that has made the FV215b a bit of a fan favorite. I'm going to let you know everything there is to know about this vehicle, follow it up with some Ace Tanker gameplay, and if you have no interest in picking it up and getting the FV215b before it becomes a reward vehicle, then hang around anyway and I'll show you some of the vehicle's weak points that you can take advantage of when it hits the battlefield. So before we delve into the statistics of the Super Conqueror and see how it stacks up to its Tier 10 competition, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One, why is this going into the game as a replacement for the FV215b? What are its origins? And also I guess I should talk about the Chieftain. So firstly, why is this vehicle going into the game? Well, I guess Wargaming are unhappy with the fact that the FV215b is kind of a make-believe vehicle, and so Wargaming wanted to replace it with something more tangible, but the Super Conqueror that will be going into the game next patch is effectively the hull of a Conqueror with extra spaced armor over the top of the hull, and this originates kind of from reality because there was a target that they used for ballistics tests, but the turret that you can see here doesn't actually look too much like the turret that is going to be going into the game, and that's because the turret was only a proposal that David Lister has published on various blogs. And so effectively the Super Conqueror, as it's going to be going into the game, is a real hull testbed with a proposed turret that would have been an upgrade over the Conqueror. The next question you might be asking is, why not just replace the FV215b with the Chieftain that's already in the game files, even on the European server, and has made an appearance on the console version of World of Tanks? And I guess the issue is the Chieftain was in service from 1966 onwards, while the Conqueror was from 1955. And I presume Wargaming's main fear is pushing their game too far into the post-World War II period. But then again, the SDB-1 wasn't delivered until 1968. Nevertheless, I still hope to see the Chieftain on the PC outside of the Chinese server one day, but I guess hopes are severely diminished. On the other hand, maybe you don't give a darn about historical accuracy and all you care about is if the Super Conqueror is going to be a killing machine in World of Tanks. So let's see how it stacks up compared to the vehicle it's replacing, the FV215b, and also a vehicle that I think is going to give it quite a run for its money, the T10E5. So immediately we notice that the Super Conqueror has lower DPM than the FV215b, but it is higher than the T10E5. In fact, it's right in the middle, and that's because this vehicle fires 6.45 rounds a minute, while the E5 fires 6, and the FV215b was renowned for its 6.9 rounds a minute rate of fire. And this is actually quite disappointing for the Super Conqueror, and that's because the FV215b had one of the highest DPMs on any heavy tank in the game, only behind the T57 Heavy. But when we factor in that the FV215b can use a gun rammer, and as an autoloader the T57 Heavy could not, that kind of pushes this vehicle closer towards it. And look how far we have to go down the list now to be able to find the Super Conqueror, past the 113, past the WZ1115A, even past the recently buffed Carnarvon, but more on that in a future video. And there's the Super Conqueror. Now, don't get me wrong, this is by no means a bad damage per minute, but it's just not excellent like it was on the FV215b. One great thing about the Super Conqueror, however, are the high explosive squashed head rounds, the HESH rounds on this tank. 515 damage, 120 millimeters of penetration. That's double the high explosive penetration on the high explosive rounds on the T10E5. Another nice thing about the Super Conqueror is it carries 40 rounds of ammunition. This is 5 better than the FV215b, and when you want to be taking some of that HESH, then you take a low amount of armor piercing rounds, and I quite often ran out of AP on the FV215b and was forced to fire some APCR rounds when you didn't need to. And those 5 extra rounds should make the Super Conqueror cheaper to play, and also you're going to be less pushed at the end of the battle. So how about the gun handling on the Super Conqueror? Well, this is where it's disappointing news really. 2 seconds aim time, not as good as the FV215b, the same as the E5. 0.33 accuracy is as good, but look at the dispersion values. 0.16 when moving, way worse than the FV215b. 0.14 when turning the turret, way worse than the 0.08. This is not going to be the snapshotting monster that the FV215b was. And in fact, this turret traverse dispersion is way worse than the E5. And so that means that the E5 is going to be a much better snapshotter than the Super Conqueror will be. The vehicle also has a mediocre 7 degrees of gun depression, just like the FV215b, and it can be rather frustrating when you're trying to work a ridgeline in your high-tier British Heavy. Now onto mobility. It's got the same top speed limit as the FV215b, which is worse than the E5, but look at the power to weight ratio. It is 1 horsepower per ton, well over 1 horsepower per ton, worse than the FV215b, and 4 nearly worse than the E5. But to make things worse, the ground resistances are worse on every terrain than the FV215b, and they're barely any better than the E5. That makes this vehicle feel really sluggish getting into position. And things get even worse when we look at the track traverse on this tank. It is 26 degrees a second. That means that the FV215b can turn around 50% faster off all terrains, and even the E5 is significantly faster. The Super Conqueror kind of turns a bit more like a German heavy than one of these faster heavies. And that's something you should definitely take into account if you're eyeing up this vehicle. Now onto the armor. This is where it's good news for the Super Conqueror. It's got better side armor than the T10 and 279mm of turret armor compared to the E5's 203. And so let's take a look at it in some more detail. Well, the lower plate is still garbage, that's for sure. 101mm. That means that you're going to be penetrated from pretty much all angles if you expose your lower plate. However, the upper plate, it's rather okay. 152mm of raw armor with 20mm of spacing on top of that. And that means that if you angle the vehicle slightly, we're talking about 290, sometimes 300mm of effective armor. And if you manage to use your gun depression in this tank, well, now they're getting through 330. And remember, that spacing is going to protect you from heat rounds in a very efficient manner. But one thing that's incredible about the Super Conqueror is the side armor. 101mm is way better than on the T10 but there's also something of crucial importance. And that is, while all FV215b drivers will tell you this tank is an incredible side scraper, if you go like this, you think that you're almost impenetrable. There is an area on the side of the tank that we can see here. This is actually at the angling on the fighting compartment that is only 101mm thick and easily penetrated by every tank that can shoot it. And it can be unbelievably frustrating playing in the FV215b that if you're playing against somebody who doesn't know about this weak point, you can take advantage of them. But if they do, then they're going to penetrate you pretty much every time if they hit it. But let's take a look to see what this weak point looks like on the Super Conqueror. Okay, looks like Wargaming have compensated by tripling it. It now has 304.8mm of armor, which means that when you side scrape out in the Super Conqueror, you still got 346mm in this weak point. Well, at least previous weak point on the FV215b. And it's not until you over-angle the tank and expose the side of the fighting compartment that it goes down to about 240mm. And so this is great news for the Super Conqueror. You are going to be able to side scrape even against knowledgeable opponents, unlike you could do in the FV215b. So now onto the turret, and this is where things get really crazy for the Super Conqueror. 279mm of all-round frontal protection. And the space shields to the left and to the right of the turret count as 20mm of spaced armor, making the effective impact here about 350. The mantlet as well is very thick, 279 well angled with some spacing above it as well, making the effective armor at the top of the gun over 500. And if your enemies want to take the chance at aiming past the spaced armor on this vehicle, they're still going to need to have about 300mm of effective armor to be able to go through it. Now, one thing that's very interesting about the Super Conqueror is the cupola on top is now well angled from all sides, unlike the FV215b, which had this flat area here that you can see on the front that if you were able to hit, you would always penetrate. On the Super Conqueror, however, if it's using any of its gun depression, this is going to be an auto ricochet for all armor-piercing rounds. Although do keep in mind that the top of the tank is 50.8mm thick, and so while you will bounce 152mm caliber guns, all 153mm caliber guns and larger are going to be able to overmatch the forehead of this vehicle. But back to the cupola. While it will ricochet armor-piercing rounds from this angle, as soon as your opponents are on a level playing field, or even, God forbid, that they're a little bit above you, then this top section is a big weak point. But of course, not everybody fights fair, so to say, and fires high explosive rounds, so what if people are firing firing heat rounds, for example, a 113 against you. Yeah, well, the top of that cupola is going to be penetrated from pretty much every angle that it's visible. And so my recommendation is that if you're firing at the top of a Super Conqueror, you should fire heat, and then you're going to go through it every single time, even if it's using its gun depression. But then again, if it is angling its tank downwards, you can easily go through with armor piercing, so you don't need to waste the credits. And so there's no doubt that the Super Conqueror is a dramatic armor upgrade over the FV215b, but you've just got to ask yourself whether it's worth giving up the mobility, giving up the DPM, the gun handling, and also look at some view range. The FV215b had a fantastic 410 meters view range. The Super Conqueror has a standard 400. And also the hit points. The FV215b had a big old slug of hit points, 2,500. And while the Super Conqueror is very healthy compared to a T10 for example, with 2,200, it's still 150 less than it was on its predecessor. But anyway, I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's see how it performs in some gameplay. So here we go, we're going to be taking it to the enemy team as we are assaulting on Corellia, and everyone is tier 10 here. Lots of people playing the FV4005s, they've been dramatically buffed, as you would have found out yesterday if you looked at my patch preview. I'll see if I can try and find a video on that tank. But I'd really love to see some of your great gameplay in the vehicle as well. So if you've been on the test server and you've had a great time in the FV4005 Stage 2, upload it onto What Replays and put my name in the title. And if somebody uploads a monster game, then I'll use it and feature the tank and do a showcase of what's going to happen. But I'm really thinking that the FV4005 Stage 2 might be toned down in the subsequent versions of the test server, and so I'm kind of holding off to see that. But anyway, back to the Super Conqueror. And take a look at the turret on this tank. I don't know what you guys think, but I think it's got like a Venus flytrap on the front of the vehicle when you're aiming down on it like that. I think it is a cool looking tank. Not quite as cool as the Chieftain. But one thing I want to highlight is just how slow this tank is getting up the slope. Look, we're down to 12 kilometers an hour going up this. Well, I guess it is a fairly steep incline. But there are quite a few steep inclines like this. And there's no doubt that this tank takes forever to get up a hill, unlike the FV215b did, or the E5, for example. Now we fire an armor-piercing round there at the FV4005, and now we're loading these special HESH rounds. And that tank's got 14 millimeters of turret armor, and so these HESH rounds with the fabulous 120 millimeters of penetration, easily able to go through it. We do 583 damage with that HESH penetration. We get to finish him off with the second shell. Now back to armor piercing rounds, and I can overmatch the entirety of that STB1's side armor, so I can fire into the tracks there, lock him in place, and also do 386 damage to him. So not a bad start, and that IS-7 is angling his lower plate upwards, so another easy penetration. No need to fire any premium rounds against this IS-7 here, and the fairly good aim time, the great accuracy on this tank, and the pretty okay rate of fire allows us to pick up a load of damage in the first 2 minutes of this game. We're up to 2,200 with the correct use of ammunition. No need to fire those premium rounds. Use the HESH to your advantage to be able to supplement your damage and do some extra against lightly armored targets, and you'll see that the Super Conqueror is quite a rewarding tank. It will take you getting some use, well, it will take getting some used to, I should say, in the Super Conqueror to really figure out what kind of ammunition you need to use. But you'll probably learn to do that if you've been playing through the regular Conqueror, right, at tier 9. We're just looking for a shot into the top of the Super Conqueror's turret, but we can see that while he is holding at the back and he is in a very heavily armored tank, if he's getting shot in the side, he's not going to be too well. And while there is no artillery that we need to watch out for, his armor definitely didn't hold up. Ours, on the other hand, has so far. We bounced a heat round from the STB1, we bounced one from the IS-7, we got penetrated by the FOSH-B, but there you go, the HESH round from the FV4005 does some damage to us, but you know what, it could be worse. 539 is not as bad as it could be. We managed to penetrate the T57 Heavy once, we lock him in place, our friends are shooting him now, the Kranvang comes around the corner and unloads on the T57 Heavy, and I tried to get into position to save him, but I'm unable to do so, and the Kranvang dies. Very Juicy Tomato is his name, and he goes, "No!" in the chat, and I have to admit, he was saying hi to me during the game, and I was unable to reply to him because, you know, I'm trying to focus on getting some good gameplay and getting some kills right, but a big hello to you, Very Juicy Tomato, today. Alright, now up to 3,300 damage, 1,800 spotting and tracking, all of that good stuff. The IS-7 over-angles his armor, and so we're able to aim down on it, and even though, you know, it's very well angled, and the IS-7's armor is fantastic. If he over-angles it like that, you can just aim down on the front plate to be able to penetrate. And while the Super Conqueror performed admirably in this gameplay, I really want you guys to question whether the T10 could have done the same thing, or even if the FV215b would have been able to do it better. But you know what? I don't think the FV would have been able to do it better there. Quite often we had to go on the attack around a corner against our opponents. And remember, the Super Conqueror, with its front-mounted turret compared to the FV215b, where the turret is more like here at the back, doesn't have to expose as much of its frontal armor. And also, the upper hull armor is way better, so you're going to be able to pull off some ricochets. Of course, your lower plate still sucks, but if you have to expose less of it as you go around the corner with a front-mounted turret, then it does make the Super Conqueror better at being aggressive, I feel. Either way, obviously the highlight of this tank is the armor, so let's take a look at some more situations where this vehicle is absorbing punishment. So now we're defending against an assault on Sand River, and we just got shot in the side of the turret by an Object 260. Now, of course, if you leave your side turret towards your opponents, then they're easily able to go through you, just like that cheeky Bat Chatillon. But when you get into this kind of a position at long range against your opponents, this tank just feels absolutely meaty. Already 2 rounds bounced from the final reward, right? The Object 260. I wonder if we're going to be seeing more of those vehicles on the battlefield next patch. Obviously, with the changes to the personal missions now becoming the campaign, that's quite likely to happen, that we're going to see a few more of them. Oh, there we go. 420 millimeters of penetration bounced from the Jagdpanzer E100. And there you go, now the 260's firing heat rounds at us as well. He's got, what, 340, 330 millimeters of penetration, and he fails to go through our tank. We blocked 2,300. That would be enough to kill our tank outright if those rounds had gone through. But there you go, another heat round bounce from the 260, and a Jagdpanzer E100 just bounced a shell as well. I guess that was a heat round, although it's not showing up on the top left-hand corner. He definitely hit us. We heard that meaty shot. I think what the Jagdpanzer did there... Oh, look, yeah, he hit through the top of the bar, so he hit that area. Maybe some opponents are going to think that they can shoot through. Actually, look, it went on to hit the hull as well, and it just failed to go through. So the Super Conqueror's turret here, we were actually up to about 4,000 damage blocked in about a minute. And I have to admit, right now I'm just sitting out in front of my opponents, sniping them occasionally when we can, and kind of just baiting them into shooting us. The 260's got so fed up of bouncing armor-piercing and heat rounds that he's now firing high-explosive rounds. But there we go, the Jaegeru finally penetrates a heat round on us, doing just over 962 damage exactly. And where did that round go in? Well, it looks like it hit just to the right of the mantlet. Maybe it went on to go through the side of the turret there. But when you're toying with 420 millimeters of penetration, that could roll above 500 millimeters, right? There's no wonder that one's occasionally going to go in. But what I'm trying to highlight here is there are very few tanks in the game that I would feel so comfortable going hull down against 420 millimeters of heat round. And bouncing 2 out of 3 isn't half bad, as well as ricocheting all of the heat rounds, the 340 millimeter penetration heat rounds from the Object 260. Unless I'm in something like an IS-7, I feel this could be a bit of a niche for the Super Conqueror. And if you want to excel in this tank, I think this is the kind of gameplay that you're going to have to develop. But just remember, the Super Conqueror's turret is far from perfect. And remember, I highlighted that hatch on top of the tank. Look at that, easy penetration there. If you are not using your gun depression, even armor-piercing rounds are going to be able to go through that kind of hatch, the viewports on top. I actually missed the turret there. I just hit the viewport. That's why that one failed to penetrate. And look, there we go. Another one right into the top of the tank. And so be very careful. If you are not using your gun depression and you're exposing the top of the vehicle, you are not going to live long to tell the tale. And also, as I showed in the garage, never expose this to heat rounds, even if you are using all of your gun depression, as heat is going to go right through pretty much every time. So unfortunately, I can't upload Super Conqueror replays on the What Replays website, I guess because it's from the test server, but fortunately the awesome What Replays analyzer has got me covered. This was an ace tanker for our Super Conqueror, 1,241 base experience points, 4,000 damage dealt, 3 kills, 1,877 assistance, and because we didn't fire any premium rounds, we make a cool 43,000 credits profit. So is the Super Conqueror the latest and greatest vehicle in the game, and it's now going to be the #1 tank to go for so that you can purchase it and wipe the floor with all of your opponents? Well, no, I don't think that's going to be the case. The vehicle has massive drawbacks compared to the FV215b, and that's been in the game for years, and it's even got some drawbacks compared to the T10 with regards to its mobility and also its gun handling, especially when it turns the turret. And while I've highlighted the turret can be very strong, it also has this really annoying weak point on top of the vehicle, and let's not forget to mention the tank's god-awful lower plate whenever you expose it is way easier to penetrate than on the T10 for example. But on the other hand, is the Super Conqueror a terrible tank? Well, no, that's not the case either. I guess I'm just a bit disappointed with it, however, because when we looked at what Wargaming did with the Foch B, the Foch B was a 33% DPM upgrade over the Foch 155 and an armor upgrade. It was just an all-round buff. There was nothing worse about the Foch B, I guess apart from the penetration, than there was compared to the Foch 155. I'd say all in all it was probably a 10 to 20% upgrade statistically over the entire vehicle. While with the Super Conqueror, while there's no doubt the armor is better than the FV215b, you have to give up a lot to get it. And while I must add the caveat that this is a test server and it's not even in its final iteration yet and everything is subject to change, if the Super Conqueror goes into the game with these current statistics, there is more reason than ever to really get moving and grind towards the FV215b to be able to get your hands on it before, effectively, it's removed from general release. Because unlike the Foch 155, which is pretty much just a collector's tank now, and the Foch B is just significantly better than it, that's not going to be the case with the Super Conqueror and the FV215b. And so there you have it, everything you need to know about the Super Conqueror. I hope you enjoyed this video and it was useful to you. If it was, please give it a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for another World of Tanks Tech Tree Showcase on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And this week, thanks to Marcus, his suggestion, and the 132 of you who liked it, I'm going to be working my way towards the T57 Heavy, that tier 10 American auto-loading heavy tank and the highest DPM of any heavy tank in the game. And if you've never been to one of my Tech Tree Showcases before, they start at tier 1 and I give you a tank review and gameplay all the way up to tier 10, so you can see if it's a line if you're interested in grinding, or alternatively, maybe pick up a few tips and tricks if you already own the tech tree. And so really looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic and hopefully I'll see you soon.